Welcome to Earth, a love story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter, and I want to start out this week by reading you a poem. This poem is called If Prayer Would Do It, and it's by Stephen Levine from his book, Breaking the Drought. And I was reading that book because it's getting to be that time of year where our eyes are turning to the skies and we're looking for rain. Looking for the moisture that will come after the long winter to nourish all of the green little life that is arriving and sprouting in the valley. So I was looking through this beautiful book that was brought into my life by my teacher, Sarah of Magdalene. Today we're talking to my dear friend, my dear heart friend, Yoni Shadmi. Yoni reached out to me after my appearance on Stuart Davis's Aliens and Artists, and we have just developed a beautiful friendship that continues to deepen and blossom. So as I came across this poem, it seemed particularly appropriate for this conversation. And the poem is called If Prayer Would Do It. If prayer would do it, I'd pray. If reading esteemed thinkers would do it, I'd be halfway through the patriarchs. If contemplation would do it, I'd have translated the periodic table to hermit poems, converting matter to spirit. If even fighting would do it, I'd already be a black belt. If anything other than love could do it, I'd have done it already and left the hardest for last. With that, please enjoy this conversation with me and Yoni Shadmi. To me, just the fact that there's a metaphor or a reflective story happening in your dreams is incredibly rich, and we just don't take it seriously. Mm-hmm. Humans just have been taught to just not take it seriously, just be like, oh yeah, that was just my mind and psyche sort of making sense of things, and I get it. But if it's real, if we give it if we're not privileging waking life as the only real thing, then those things become, for me anyway, that's when they all came alive. Then it becomes like, oh wow, there's a whole narrative and other experience happening that's just as real as what's happening here.
Yeah, that feels like a much richer, and just a more correct or more full way to look at it. And, when I hear your experiences, I don't treat it as, to me, it feels like, and I don't have any basis for this, but like you are uncovering something that is there, that in a way, everyone can have that, some part of it. We're just completely unaware of it. And then trying to increase slowly through the years the resolution of listening to the subtle world. It's cool to have someone like you, just another morning with an out-of-body experience, and just crazy, just beautiful.
I agree with you. I do think it's all already there. I'm trying really hard not to organize any of this into a system, because that's what we do. We're like, now let's turn it into let's wrangle it into a system but at the same time, I do want a framework and a way to organize, to talk about all of this. And one of them is the idea of just deconditioning from the world, deconditioning from the structures that exist here and the way that we came up in them, and what we adopted and what we've pushed aside, and all of the things that we've internalized from these external structures that are 100% made up. We look at them as if they're monadic or something, that they come from some unchanging source, but they don't. We made them all up, and we did the best with. They're not bad or evil, but as our collective awareness increases, we get to decondition from them if we want, and figure out what is underneath and take it seriously. That's my whole thing, is taking it seriously.
A decondition from what? Like, can you talk a little bit more about the thing that we need to be deconditioned from?
Yeah, and I don't think anybody should if they're not feeling whatever that call is, because one of the things that happens is you just end up without a safety net for a really long time. It's like when we leave the overculture, it's what keeps us alive. It's if you can play that game really well, you're safe, you know. And
Mm.
if you can't play it, you're still in it, and there's still a chance that you can like figure out the game and play it. But if you leave the game, it's really terrifying. It's really scary. So, for example, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for
Sure.
2 years, the last 2 years or so, I really consciously decided to stop certain things and just to see what would happen. So, this lifelong, I think I started dieting for the first time when I was
Mm.
like 14. And I was like
Wow.
taking diet pills when I was 14. And I was a little athlete, like I was so fit and I was so healthy and there wasn't a thing wrong with me. But I did, I thought that I needed to be skinnier. And so my entire life I've done this like, okay, now I'm going to try Atkins and, low
Mm.
carb. And then I became a vegan. I became a vegetarian. I was vegetarian for a long time. Then I became a vegan. Then I became a raw fruitarian, which was
Oh,
really
wow.
easy and kind of wonderful when I lived on Hawaii. I just ate like mangoes and papayas, and my goal, I think, was like breatharianism. I was just like, I'm just going to stop,
Mm.
this all of
Oh,
this
wow.
food living in the body stuff is, so I was following all of these like cultural systems that were emerging, and then as you know, like the ETs at some point told me to eat meat, and I was really struggling with my
Mm.
health, and I hadn't had
Mm.
meat, I hadn't had that for 7 years. And so I did. I started eating meat again, which was a really hard decision. And the first bite I took of it was like, I felt horrible. And I felt
Mm.
there was all this
Yeah, it's like a
morality and
religious
guilt.
act. It's
Oh,
sacrilegious.
totally. Yes, absolutely. But the last 2 years, when I started like consciously deciding, like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to, like, what if I just eat whatever the hell I want? Like 100%, like no restriction whatsoever. What would happen? What would happen if I did that? What would happen if I got out of fitness culture? If I like left the gym, if I stopped like watching, fitness videos on Instagram or whatever, and if I just, what would happen if I dissented from that culture? What would happen if I quit my job and dissented from, working far past my body's capacity? And I did it really slowly. And every time I got to an edge, it was really terrifying. It was just like, who will I be? Like, what will happen? I'm going to gain, 150 pounds, and I'm going to, like, there'll be no place for me in the world. But I just honestly just wanted to see what would happen. Those are just a few of my particular things that I like dissented from. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch of things that we could dissent from and just see what happens. But, but
Where are
yeah,
you
that
today,
was,
like in terms of food? Because I don't,
um,
can we
mhm.
ever, food is always a big deal, I think. I
It
mean,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not because I haven't been there yet, but I still have a really hard time with the way that meat is produced. Like, I try really hard not to eat
Mm.
industrial agriculture meat because I feel like it strips the dignity of the animal and our dignity away to treat animals that way. And so we try to get meat very locally and sustainably. And I try, so that
Yeah.
always, for a while I didn't restrict that at all. I just ate, whatever. But now what's naturally arising, which I wondered if this would happen. This was like what I hoped would happen. I hoped that it
Uh-huh.
would naturally arise the way that I wanted to eat and feel good. After like
Yeah.
unlimited. I can have cake for breakfast. Like I could do whatever I want, you know?
How long was that period? That sounds great. Like,
It
it's
was
not
great.
doesn't sound great, but like, was it a month
Yeah.
or years or?
Oh no, it was at least a full year. Yeah,
Wow. And did you
and
have
I
cake
did
for
gain weight.
breakfast?
I did have
But
cake for breakfast,
oh,
yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that
I
sounds
would
good.
have like my ex-partner would go out to he had like a thing once a week that he went to, and on that night I would have steak and cake. That was like my dinner that I would have. I would go to the store, I
Ah,
would buy a
sounds
steak,
good.
and I would get a piece of cake, and I would eat a steak and have a piece of cake.
Wow.
And I was
I
I was
mean,
like, yeah.
like once a week, a month or something. I'm not against that. That's like my Friday.
Mhm.
Not exactly, but usually it's fish. But yeah, steak and cake. Like for me, food, it's as you know, it's like it's bound in my spiritual practice because I kind of bless
Mhm.
before I eat most of the time. And like what comes
Mhm.
up for me, like one of the parts of it that are, even if I'm super numb and disconnected from the world, like eating
Mhm.
is taking a piece of the world and literally putting it in my mouth and inside my body. So that
Yeah.
can be like the one moment of the day where I do have some kind of interaction with the world. Of course, when you're numb, even that you won't feel. Even that just will
Mhm.
go right through you. But still, that's a nice thing about eating, that you're integrating with the world.
Yeah. That's so interesting because I wouldn't say that eating has in my life often been a moment of presence.
That's when I
Yeah,
meditate now. And I now understand how
I love
crazy
it.
that is.
No, it's
And
not.
also,
I
this
think
is
it's
something you
great.
do a lot during the day, and it's a fun thing usually.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
So
that's
you bring presence there, like
yeah,
you come in, you snap into like, here I am, this is what I'm doing, and I
yeah,
love that.
exactly. Oh, this is what I'm eating. And also other moments, but like
Mm.
most of the moments are around food, and that's actually like the classic like Jewish Orthodox way to do it.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, also not around food, but mostly around food.
I love
Funny,
that.
yeah.
I mean, it's like it's one of the places that's so deeply connected to our survival and has become in this overculture something
Hmm.
not at all connected. It's like two extremes. One is like just
Mm.
pure sensual pleasure
Mm.
and numbing and sort of
Mm.
gluttony. And then the
McDonald's,
other
yeah.
extreme is like it's only fuel for the body. Like don't even have any pleasure from food. It's just like protein shakes and so there's like it's disconnected from what it actually is, which is so sustaining and amazing. Like I love that. I'm gonna plant that seed in my mind because I think that's so
Mm.
beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I'm honored. Really
Yeah.
nice.
It's interesting that like what I'm feeling is how I still have a resistance to which
Hmm.
I didn't know that I had until you like started talking about it, but I have a resistance to things that are spiritual or present necessarily being pleasurable. Like
Mm.
I have this
Mm.
like disconnect where I'm like, it's not supposed
Because
to
it's not
be
work.
about pleasure.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about, yeah, like work or something that the Buddha tried to starve himself down to 1 grain of rice, like to get rid of
Yeah.
all desire. It didn't work. It's like we do live in this. I think that was part of my experiment of letting of I can eat as much as I want, and if I don't want to
Mm.
exercise, I don't exercise, and I can just lay around. I started sleeping in. I started
Mm.
sleeping a lot. I just like lived in my bed. I just did
Mm.
whatever I wanted to do, and part of that was just like I want to be in my body. Like what does that feel like? What
Mm.
if I don't put like the mental construct of the overculture onto my day and what I'm doing? What will happen? Like who am I? What do I want to do? So
That sounds so good. Like, I mean, yeah, like a true vacation. It sounds. Yeah, you eat steak and cake. You sleep in. I just, I'm just picturing. Yeah, you lie in bed and you feel your body, the fullness of it. And yeah, I'm not gonna get up. I'm just gonna
yeah,
like
yeah.
vacation.
Like
Yeah, that sounds good.
there were many times when I thought, okay, like that's enough. I need to pick up and like make another system and
Mm.
do the thing and get back to being, this can't last forever. But I kept resisting that and thinking, like, I actually just want to I want to go as far as I can go. Like, what will happen to my life if I just let it all go? I'm not going to have my big, high paying job. I'm not going to do all the things in the world that you're supposed to do. I'm not going to go to a single party that I'm invited to that I don't want to go to. If somebody invites me somewhere and I don't want to go, I'm going to say no, thank you. Like, I just did whatever I wanted to do. And this is the result, I think. Like, I'm not sure if it's a one-to-one, but like suddenly I live in the woods in this space that is totally, I find completely luxurious. And I have this like fairy tale bed that's right up against the windows. But now what's emerging, which I really hoped, I was like secretly hoping it would happen, is a very natural impulse arising about what I want to eat. Like, now that I know I can have everything, I could eat cake every day, 3 times a day for the rest of my life. I like cake. I like chocolate cake, but I could do.
Me too.
Who doesn't like cake? Yeah. So I could do that. But what's naturally arising now is my body's calling to not eat as much meat. Like, I've really it's naturally just gone down. There are certain kinds of meat that I really don't want to eat, and eating a lot more plants. And I'm not saying that I think that would not be true for everyone. I think it's so individual, but for me, it's like, oh, actually I did really enjoy, like, my body really liked eating that way. And what kind of movement, I was really into yoga and Ashtanga yoga, and like, so sort of like a masculine practice, actually. Like, you step exactly here, you move exactly this way.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what do I want to do now? And my body's like, wants to do sort of this mix between like dance and yoga. Like, I still want to carry some of those things, but not in the very structured. And I don't know, maybe that'll change. Maybe I'll go back to like strict Ashtanga or something. But it's so cool to see, like, oh, it's actually, there's something emerging that it's not like, given the opportunity, I will just lay in bed and eat cake forever.
I like how it all like springs organically. Like, okay, so like there's no prescription. It feels like we're living in a time where that's because all prescriptions kind of fail. And I know that you have really rigorous spiritual systems, but what we're talking about now feels so organic, and that's something that I always like about your decision-making process. Like, I know, again, the word richness comes to mind. It's like this big thing. It's not reductive. It's not like you couldn't say, well, I understood X and then I did Z. It's like this process, this wave out of space. I don't know, maybe because it's another person, it sounds like fun. But and I'm not talking about the work that goes behind it, but just like, in a way, the morning that you describe sounds like fun. Yeah, it does sound like fun. Like, you have the out-of-body experience, you have the lucid dream, you have the waking up in a completely different physical feeling, and then you have the processing of that feeling, like a cake.
It is fun. It really is. And I definitely have not had fun with all of this for a long time, because it's been really, the last several years have been about grief, like learning about grief and learning to, I have a very wise friend that I will also interview, and she's fantastic. Her name is Samantha. And we were talking, and I was talking about having to surrender to, like, sort of the death process that I went through about a year ago, when I just, like, my relationship was ending and I got really sick, and it was this whole big journey. And I sort of surrendered all of my small dreams and hopes. It sounds horrible, but it was like, there was nothing else I could do. I was like, I can't, like, no matter what I do, it's not ever going to solve the problem. Like, the problem of suffering, the problem of, like, there's no getting out of it. I don't know what else to do. And that's when, this, one of my mantras is like, there's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to do. I am here. I am here. I am here. That's what I say. So that happened during that time. And I was talking to her about grief, and how one of the things about grief is that you can't get you can't get out of it. Like there's no, it's something that just overtakes you, and it's so difficult. And she described, she's a, she's a, I'm going to get it wrong, so she'll forgive me, but she's like a marriage and family counselor, and also this brilliant like tarot reader and wonderful witchy tattooed woman. And she said it's important when you're a child, like it's important for children to come up against things that they can't get around. Like they have to come up against a boundary at some point that is immovable. They
Mm-hmm.
have to surrender to something, you know? And she said the same thing happens. I think she said it's important that the same thing happen at some point in our adult life. Like we just have to come up against,
Mm.
she described like coming to a wall. And I immediately thought, oh, and then you got to like climb the wall. And she was like, no,
Mm.
it's too high to
It's
climb.
just all.
You can never get around it. You can't dig under it. Like there's nothing you can do. And that made
Mhm.
so much sense to me. It was like, I just had to surrender to that incredible grief. And I also really hoped that it would somehow secretly lead to joy. Is there a
Mm.
pathway through like grief and death? Like, what is the rebirth and can it be joy? And that's sort of what's happening. Like, I'm discovering joy again. It's just like, it's so wonderful. But for a long time, I was just like, I don't think joy, I didn't even know how to feel. I didn't know how to feel it, and I didn't know how to get to it at all. So now it's like, I feel like I've gone so deeply down into the underworld that I'm finally coming back up, and there actually is joy. It's a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt I felt a little bit of relief when you described the wall. And you said so beautiful, like, yeah, okay, so how do I get up over the wall? But then, oh no. And
Right.
it reminded me of parenting, of just,
Mm,
yeah, there's something, no, there's nothing you can do when you say to a child, like, you don't say it like that, hopefully, but
right.
when it's clear to us that we're just humans, that we have just like only
Mm,
human, and then no, there's something no that's immovable for you.
right. And that surrender, that death, like
Okay.
intentionally, intentionally, I'm sorry. It's never, I'm always like, it's always death. Like it's always suffering,
Yeah,
death
I
up
also
against
thought about that.
these.
I also thought about
Yeah.
that. That's
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So coming up against that edge of that thing that is immovable,
Hmm.
that we don't get to negotiate with, we don't have any control over. There's nothing, it doesn't matter what your station is in. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing you can do, nothing. And then deciding, am I going to trust this?
Mm.
Am I going to trust life that includes death? Am I going to trust whatever this is, like whatever we're doing here, this being in form, like all the stuff that's happening here, the process, the life and death, this like huge mystery? Am I going to trust it, or am I going to go to war with it? Because those are the only two options. It's either like, for me anyway, like I'm sure we could find other
Hmm.
options, but like for me, it's
Hmm.
either like, okay, I'm going to surrender. I'm going to sit down at the bottom of this wall and just let it be this immovable force and surrender to it and trust that there's a benevolence to this process that is so too big for me to even understand. Or is this place a like dark malevolent hellscape? Either this is good for me, that's my thought process. Like it's either benevolent and good, and it includes the suffering, it includes the death, it includes the thing we come up against that we can't get around, and trusting that there's some goodness behind all of that, or this place is just a circus, horror, carnival, freak show. Like for me, those are
Maybe
the only two
both. Yeah.
options. Right.
What this brings up for me is like the male side of God. I just realized as you said it that
Mm,
this is part of what I feel when that comes up. Because okay, there's like the female side with breathing and yoga and like eternal love, just love, 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 love. which I know less about in my current state. I know less about that, but enough to, okay, people I trust are there like you, and also a little bit personally. And then there's something relieving when you go to the male side of God. And it's kind of the way that I kind of think about it is like you can do all the spiritual work of the world and and it will help you. It will be good and important, and you will feel the love. But still, there's this thing that you can call it a random factor if you don't believe in God, but you can never get past that as long as you're human. There's always, and then you'll be in an accident.
Right.
And when you said there's something kind of relieving about it, and reminds me of like there's this in popular culture, they say like in samurai you should meditate about death, whatever, 4 times a day. And it's kind of like that. You keep reminding yourself after everything that I've done and all my efforts and all my growth, still there's a immovable thing that decides for you.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I mean, yes, that's the core of it. It's like, I can't earn my way. I can't pay my way. I can't I can't deny my physical body through it. I can't, like, no matter how many prostrations I do, no matter how good I am, no matter how clever I am, no matter, like, none of those ultimately, it's still just this thing that we have to like bend a knee to or fight, or just rage against. And that's also infective. Yeah.
I do that a lot. I rage against it a lot. And I would just say that like in classic Kabbalah, as I understand it, like the female part, the mother part is not exactly above, but is kind of, the love is above that. The love is the mother, and the male part of God is her son, in a way.
Yeah. There's a hierarchy, of a small hierarchy.
Yeah. And in the end, it is love, even that part.
I mean, that feels good. Like, I think that's the thing I'm surrendering to, is that love, like hoping that above, like that somewhere in this system, that's what's holding it all together, and that's what's going on here. Because otherwise, I can't bear the alternative, that it's not that. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about hell?
Yeah. So I also want to talk about, like, this hell conversation reminded me, like, how we met, you reaching out after hearing me on Aliens and Artists, and you sent me this email, and I was kind of stunned by it, because you were making all of these connections between my experiences and your lineage and religious traditions. And it's an area that I know nothing about. I still don't. I'm like learning through you little things, but I found that so fascinating. It's like there are these commonalities that exist throughout all of these different realms and spiritual practices. And I always love looking at all the different traditions and religions and finding the common things, because there's probably some juice there, So talking about messengers and angels, and talking about how people fought against, like, they tell me to do stuff all the time, and I say, no, I'm a human. I can't, like, you don't understand what it's like here, and I don't want to do all the things. And you sort of affirming that as well as part of your understanding. So when we were talking about hell the other day, it was another area that I was like, wow, this is so similar and interesting to how I've come to think about hell. So I would love to hear your understanding of and thoughts about hell. And also if you have like a little lead in or intro about what your lineage is, and, just where it comes from.
Sure. Cool. First of all, maybe just to relate to what you said about comparative religion and the fact that there are a lot of things that are common, a lot of things. And it's funny when you kind of dive even a little bit into it, it's not that it hasn't been done, but even the idea, like it's controversial, the idea that, for example, in any lineage, the ideas of soul and let's say just heaven and hell are actually based on experience. That's controversial, although that makes
Mm,
sense. Like there's a reason why people do that stuff. And like even
yeah.
at the most secular, most rational level, it's based on something. You can say it's all an
Hmm.
illusion, but it was someone experienced a form of those things, and then they wrote it down. And it's like the oldest thing, I think, like having a soul ascending somewhere. I think you can find it on cave walls. It's so universal. It comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it's relatively new that we can do that. It's relatively new that we have like access to knowledge from the entire world. Like this is like 19th century stuff. I
Hmm.
think the British Empire brought a lot of knowledge with all of the horrors because they colonized and occupied a lot and they took the knowledge. But I think now it's going to happen. Like people are really going to look, hey, okay, so what's common with Kabbalah and Native American traditions and Christianity and all that stuff? So
Hmm.
that's cool. I think it's going to happen.
The idea, like what you just brought forward, humanized religion for me so much. Like all of these things were written down because they happened to someone. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
experiential. Otherwise, how would it have ever, like it did come through human bodies and human like psyches and experience and then was written down. And I hadn't placed these, I hadn't placed that in the human experience realm. It was more like something elsewhere and,
Mm-hmm.
connected to some other place, but didn't come through the human body. But of course it did. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So I work mostly, not exclusively, but through Judaism. I'm Jewish, and it's like the big thing for me there. There were a lot of moments, but the teacher I'm working with, Michal, at some point, like we were talking about God or something, and she told me I did a lot of reading, and a lot of theorizing, and a lot of ideas. I had a lot of ideas, and we talk about God, and she asked me, "Have you met God?" And I said, "No." So then why are we talking about it? And then
Mm,
and then I understood that I need to just let all that stuff. And it's not that it wasn't important the reading, but that it just gets you as far as it gets you. And then later, I started kind of, or I didn't start, but I kind of discovered a relationship, for example, with God, and then it became much more real and more embodied and stuff like that. So that's like one point. But yeah, Jewish tradition and hell. Well, I think like this goes through mostly through Kabbalah, a little bit through other stuff as well. And the idea, like almost all other tradition, I think, yeah, there's a soul and there's a body, and the body and the soul leaves the body, and it when we die, and the soul enters the body, like we're born into the world because there are things that the soul can only experience within a body. Like the soul, in a
mm,
way, it's much greater than the body, and it's much more expensive. But there are things that only happen through that relationship. And then when we die, the soul leaves after usually like 3 days, or I don't know usually, but there's a lot of talk about the 3 days after death. And then
mm,
afterwards, there are a lot of stages. It's a very rich world. But one of the stages, one of the early stages, is what's sometimes called the Gehenom or hell. And by the way, it's called after like a specific place near Jerusalem, like a specific valley
mm,
that gave it the
mm,
name. They probably had a human sacrifice there.
mm,
Um, and so basically, what it says is that you go through the entirety of your life. Like we say, sometimes people have flashbacks when they have near death experiences of their whole lives. But you do it with like maximum sensitivity. Like you
mm,
really, really feel what's going on when people hurt you, when you hurt people, when people do good stuff to you, when you do good stuff. And it's not supposed to be a punishment. It's sometimes they equate it to laundry. Like the soul goes through a
mm,
laundry process where you re-experience everything. And one of the interesting ramifications is that you can shorten that period if you're more sensitive here on Earth. then you already know what's going on. You don't have to relive like whatever you hurting someone, because you already lived it, and you kind of suffered the pain here. So that's one idea of hell.
Wow.
And then I'd love to hear how you connect to it. And
just to be clear, so this is not a place where you end up eternally. You're there as long as it takes to fully feel your life, basically. And you get out faster if you felt it. Okay. Yeah. A phase. So that, I think, is what, like, there are several things that I was like, wow, that it's just amazed me that there were the connections, but that is one of them, that it's not eternal. Like, I gave up the idea of a God that would do that. I was just like, this is, I dissent from that system, like hardcore, when I was like 14. I was like, this is no, I refuse to let that be my reality. Or if it is, like, I will fight God if that's what's going on, because that's such bullshit. Just had an image of me fighting God, and he's just like,
that's actually cool. We should talk about that as well. That's an interesting idea.
So that's part of it, is that it's just a process. And then the tons of overlaps, like you're talking about, in near-death experiences. Like, I've listened to hundreds of near-death experiences. It's a place where, like, talk about rich, right? Because not all of them are the same. They're often like wildly different things are happening. But one of the things that comes up over and over is this re-experiencing of events of life and feeling everybody, like feeling other people's feelings, feeling your own feelings, feeling like, and that whoever is presiding over this, that's another thing that's reported, is like, there's no judgment. You're not in trouble. This isn't punishment. But the person who's going through it and feeling what they've done, feeling when they said a harsh word, or when they, it's not punishment, but it's like, it's really hard and sort of torturous to be like, oh my God, to feel all of it. And so that really, really resonated with me. And then I had one experience recently that made me sort of have a little edge of understanding that here on earth in my life experientially, which is, I've had this long, slow, safe, torturous, beautiful exit from my relationship with my ex-partner. And so it's been like this really difficult process. And we've come to like a point of closure. Like, it was really beautiful. We went through the whole thing of this parting, doing pretty good. Like, we had our moments for sure, but doing pretty good about not blaming each other, not saying this is happening because you fucked up, or, we just held so much space for each other. It was really incredible. But towards the end of this experience, I saw, in a way that I've never seen, how my actions, even though they were like, I have compassion for my actions. I believe everybody's sort of just a product of their trauma and running a lot of unconscious programs and doing a lot of damage just through unconsciousness. And so I can hold that compassion for myself, but also really seeing how my actions caused him pain, really seeing how my unhealed trauma, the stuff that I wouldn't look at, and my reactivity, and the fact that I couldn't stop clinging, and all of these things that were happening, how damaging that was for him, like how painful it was. Yeah. And I felt it, and I had this remorse that was just different. Like, I've been sorry. I'm sorry. Like I've said, we've said I'm sorry to each other 1,000 times. Like, we know that we hurt each other and we never wanted to. And I've meant it in the past that I'm sorry, but this different level of remorse came through where I really saw it. And I was horrified. I could feel it. I could feel him. I could feel me. I could see the sort of unnecessary rupturing, and that is what made me feel the resonance to what you're talking about, that hell is shorter if you can really feel if you can really feel your life. Because that is definitely, like, I'm sure that if that's what happens when we die, that I will revisit a lot of things, things that are in my underneath that I can't, that I haven't had that feeling with. But I feel like maybe I shortened hell a little bit because I felt it so fully, and it was shocking, and I felt dismayed and just a lot of pain. And I apologized again. And even though it was the same apology, that we just keep apologizing to each other, it was like the same apology, he felt it differently. Like there was something different about that experience. I apologized for my actions fully without there being like a back door of like this subtle back door of like, but that happened because of your trauma and your attachment stuff. And like, I wouldn't have been like this if you hadn't have been like that. And like, even though I intellectually had stopped doing that, like this apology was different, and it was filled with all of this remorse, and he felt it differently. And it was this real moment of healing. And it was also very mundane. Like from the outside, it didn't seem like much had happened. So that's when you described hell to me and described like, if we can feel ourselves, like feel life, the more fully we can feel life. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it was a liberation. Feeling that deeply was a liberation.
And it also feels like there wasn't sometimes apologies that you didn't feel self-hate, that it wasn't like, I'm so sorry, what have I done kind of thing, but more towards responsibility, something that also has a limit. Like it's not the end of the world. It's something. It's real, but it's right. I mean, how do you feel about it now?
Yeah, I don't think I had self-hate. I don't think I had that. It was more like a clarity and like a shock. Like, oh God, wow, I really feel this. This is so big. And the beating yourself up and the self-hate is still very selfish. And I get it.
Yeah.
Like, again, there's no like judgment, because I really, really believe that we're just products of like this generational whatever that rolls through us. And the more we become conscious of it, we can like liberate ourselves from all those patterns. And so I'm not saying that I definitely still have compassion, but it wasn't self-hate. It was clarity. It was like a realization. It was like a state experience realization, like, oh my God. It was very tender to hold, because it could easily have become about me. Like, this sort of ruminating, like I've done so many things wrong. But that still remains selfish. It still remains about, and it just wasn't that. It was just this very clear, pure state experience of remorse.
Why is that selfish? Why is self-hate selfish?
Because it's still so inwardly focused, and it's still not about the other person. It's still not connecting outward, I don't think. It's not like a connecting, repairing, seeing someone else clearly. Like my history with relationships is that I see people, and everybody does this too, but codependency and disorganized attachment style and those things, like people became my projections of them very quickly. And then when they weren't that thing that I had projected onto them, then I sort of raged, and I was like, just be this thing. Like, why are you not this thing? And so even once I was able to see that and had and I had a lot of self-hatred, it still wasn't about seeing that other person as an autonomous being with their own like massive, wild internal ecosystem with all of these like things moving through them, and respecting that deeply. Like maybe that's part of it too. It was like the first time that I really deeply saw him as his own sovereign being, and realized that I had, yeah. So I think self-hate is just still more it's just so inwardly turned. I don't know. It doesn't feel like part of an ecosystem exactly.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
And yeah, I mean, like the thing that came to me in like my kind of sort of equivalent experience, we talked about it, like understanding that one of my daughters is not having a good time at her kindergarten and moving her to another kindergarten, like a mundane thing, but it was like big for me. Like I wonder about the process, because the process leading up to the action and leading up to what I did, like I had a lot of like uh, and I did it like in private, like emotional outbursts and kind of realizations. And I did go through self hate, I think, a little bit, and I did go through kind of like saying sorry 1,000 times. And then afterwards, after it was out of my system, physically, I was in the woods outside Jerusalem, and I cried and everything. And then it settled, and then it was more. I don't know if more true, but did you go through something like that? Because it sounded like it was kind of natural for you. Like, what was the process leading up to that stage like?
Yeah, that process, exactly what you're talking about, only if you spread it out over like 10 years or something. Like, and certainly in the last 2 years of, last year and a half or whatever, of like really slowly, gently, safely trying to maturely leave this relationship and not damage each other in the process. There was all of that. It was in private, it was with each other, it was dramatic, it was the most painful. Like sometimes the self-hate was so profoundly devastating that it was so like just the rupturing and all of that. So yeah, absolutely. I think that that's exactly right. It's like if we together, but also just me, I finally got it out of my system. Like I finally, like, it was a process of releasing and feeling all of those things. And that was one of the deeply extraordinary and amazing things about it, is that we went through that together. We didn't turn away. It happened in the presence of another person, and there was enough safety there that we saw each other at the darkest, like just at the worst, and still refused to turn away from each other through this whole like horrible dying and processing event. And so, yeah, exactly what you're saying. And I can remember times in particular with that, going through that self-hate and crying, and just none of it felt connected. It wasn't, this connection, it kind of came and went, but that felt only connected to me, and that's fine. I don't think that there's anything like I don't think there's one, like it should be one or the other. It was a big mix of all of these things, but that makes total sense, that it was just like a process that had to move through the body and eventually arrived at this other place. So yeah, that experience you described exactly over 2 years.
The part where you're able to do it together is amazing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's private stuff, so don't go into what you don't feel like. But can you talk a little bit about that? What is like going through that with another person?
It was the most easily the most painful, like worse than New Mexico, worse than the dark times, worse than the addiction,
Wow.
worse than the
Wow.
the most painful thing I've ever gone through, by far, hands down, no contest. And also the most intimate experience that I've ever had with another human, and transformationally like reparative. I will always deeply love him because he stayed and I stayed, and we
Wow.
decided to stay through the death. We just like we stayed through the death together, and it was neither one of us. If we hadn't have done that, I think I would still be looking for the next relationship to fill. I don't think I surrendered to something so deeply that it was completely transformational, and it was incredibly intimate, the most horrible, wrenching, painful thing ever. But we didn't turn away. Like, we kept showing up. We just kept, and that's the amazing part, is that we just didn't bail. And there was enough safety, even with all the difficulty, that we were able to do that.
It's beautiful.
It's very beautiful. This is the first time I've talked about it without crying, which shows me that something happened, like there was that a healing has taken place on a deeper level, because this is the first time, and it's been like a year and a half or something.
Wow. Like I got like the image that I get in my mind. I get two images. One is just something they have in front of me, which is like a dark jungle and with some light coming in. And another one, which is, I'm sure it's not how it took place, but just the two of you crying on the floor in the dome. I just have that image.
Yeah. There was a lot of crying on the floor. There was a lot of crying on the floor. Exactly.
There was some of that.
Yes.
Okay.
There was, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank God things change. I'll say that. Like, thank God these cycles move and we don't have to be with, and that things can become different and better. And that's a deep faith that I have, that even in the darkest times, it's like, this will eventually, it has the potential to move and become something else. And there can be healing and repair and integration. And it's another place where I wouldn't be on the planet if I didn't deeply believe that. Because it's like, who came up with this system where you just, like, who came up with the system where you're in hell forever? And who came up with the system that you're in hell on earth forever with no way out? Like, screw that. So yeah, I'm really grateful that just, it's the nature of things to like move and evolve and shift. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. And I think there's also a lot of choice there, a lot of choice in seeing it that way. There's like a 13th century Jewish guy called the Ramban, and he has like something really nice where he says that it sounds kind of modern, that if you choose to give meaning to stuff, if you choose to see God, then stuff gets meaningful. Like physically, it does get meaningful. And if you don't, then it says something like, then God leaves you to your randomness. Like, if you don't believe then it's true, then really it becomes random. And this is just like something that I experience like a lot, both of those things. Mostly the randomness, obviously, but also for real, the other part. And I don't know if it's a neurological thing that goes on or it's whatever, something even deeper. But it feels meaningful. And also, I give you credit. We need to say this is obviously not the average human, 21st century human breakup. I give you both credit for finding each other and for being able to do that together, and not just saying, "Well, it's over, then we're done."
Yeah, it was. I agree. I think it was. My perception of these things, or the higher view, is that I do believe that people come into each other's lives to play roles for each other and to help with soul growth and evolution. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful that we're like, all right, we're going to do this thing. It's going to be really hard. But of course, from that soul space, it all looks so easy. It's like, oh, it was just a blink of an eye. That lifetime, it's like, yeah, well, down here in the mud and the blood, as one of my teachers says. But yeah, I love that. I love that idea that you just brought forward about randomness. And one of the things that the ETs told me was that when they showed me the honeycomb matrix and said, your reality hangs on this, and it changes based on where you put your attention and the quality of your attention. So that's how they said it. And it's still unfolding for me. I'm still living through understanding what that means. But I think that's similar. It's like we can enliven things by choosing to enliven them, by choosing, like, that is a real certainty reality in my life, is that when I started taking my internal world, my dreams, my experiences, my sensitivities, my body feelings, like my state experiences, all of those things, as when I started taking them seriously, as if they were real and as if they were valid and important and contained information and like were part of my being, like part of my experience of being a human on this planet, it all became alive. I didn't have to look for it or pretend or hope that it was alive and real. Like it became alive and real, and it was, and and it was a choice. It's like, it's a very tender choice to be like, actually, I'm going to take that dream seriously. You know, like I got this message in the dream and it's actually affirming what I really want to do with my life or who I want to be, or it gave me this little twinkle of information. And instead of just saying, well, that was, you know, a collection of neurons trying to make sense and the brain is, you know, or whatever the real reductionist materialist way is to say it, like saying like, something's speaking to me, I'm going to listen. And it's like, it's, we both enliven it with our attention, and it also just reveals this alive world that's already there. And it's also a matter of us coming to it and sort of shedding the layers that keep us shut off from like this massive part of being a human, and all of these antennas that we have, and all of this, all this access that we have to all of these places. I love it.
Yeah. And there's a connection there, I think, to accepting everything, accepting the negative. We're talking about a breakup here. And it had a connotation, like a much, much lighter version, obviously. I had a date with a woman, like a first date recently, and it was going pretty well. And then at some point we were saying, I feel like there's something kind of uncomfortable here. And I don't want to go into her kind of situation, but I said, oh, yeah, there's something uncomfortable. And then we didn't talk about it too much, but we kind of liked each other. It was good. But then we realized, yeah, there's not going to be a second date. And he said, oh, wait, so we're not going to see each other again? And we were just two humans kind of liking each other and getting along. Yeah. And then things got, first of all, we kind of got almost tearful, almost immediately. And also it was kind of sexy because it was kind of, yeah, this is like the last time that we're seeing each other.
Yeah.
And because we were kind of willing to go into that so-called negativity, instead of saying, yeah, maybe we'll get together, and then everything became more fun and kind of, yeah, more painful, but more fun also. I don't know if you feel like that process can be fun. That's a lot to ask for, like what you're talking about. And I'm not yet at a place where I look at like the stuff with the kindergarten as very much fun, but we kind of talked about it. I think I want to get there. I don't know if fun is the word, but how did you say it? Taking the pain, but not the bother, something like that.
Yes. One of my teachers said, first, like, I think that experience is exactly the thing. The experience with that woman and realizing that, I don't know how else to say it, but like taking it seriously. Like it could have stayed all surface. It could have been just all like, you know, you both are thinking and knowing that this isn't going to go forward, but we'll just, you know, get through dinner and have a glass of wine and politely say goodbye and not have any connection, but like moving toward the thing that is real and that is uncomfortable. Like that's the whole, like it's always moving toward the thing, like whatever the thing is, instead of the resistance that we typically have for things that are messy or uncomfortable. If we can like consciously and with awareness, you know, we're not like just going to jump into horrible situations just to see what they feel like, but like with awareness and like that connectivity and that sensitivity, like moving toward that thing, it opened up this whole other world of richness, you know? That's amazing. Yeah. So I've replaced the word fun with joy, and joy is a very loaded word, and I was very annoyed with the word joy for a long time, and then decided that I suspect and I hope that there's sort of an unconditional joy, just like there's an unconditional love. And I'm like hopeful for that and am keeping it as part of the constellation of possibilities without looking at it too closely. Because it's tender to believe that there can be an unconditional joy that includes suffering and includes all these other things. But one of my teachers said, when you become more conscious or whatever that is, it hurts more and bothers you less.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yeah, that's exactly like, it's not that it stops hurting. In fact, we become more sensitive as we become more conscious, and these things, these layers sort of gently, hopefully, come away, and we become more sensitive. I mean, it makes me think of that hell conversation, you know? At some point, the idea is to feel everything, right? Like, we've so disconnected from our emotional bodies, even from our physical sensations, from our like sensory, the way things taste and smell and feel. And we're a lot of like heads walking around with no bodies. And if there's a time when the point is to feel everything as sensitively as we can, I imagine that it hurts more. I don't think it hurts less. Like I don't think we get more numb, more disconnected, more, you know, thing. It's like the world is what it is. We just become more sensitive to it. It hurts more, but it bothers us less. It's become another one of my like little touchstone mantras because it makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And like I'm thinking or I'm hearing like the trade-off is like anxiety for pain and joy. Because everybody's so anxious all the time. And like I'm just exchanging the word bother for anxious. Everybody anxious and bothered, and like me too, obviously, and kind of always anxious about this little thing or that thing. And I think we kind of choose it in order not to kind of maybe feel the pain. And then if you're ready for that exchange, you also get the joy. This is kind of simplistic, but where it took me.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do the same thing, like constantly anxious, my mind's spinning, walking around, and then I notice my body and I'm like, oh, my shoulders are up here. You know, I love you always bring it back to the breath. Like you're always talking about breathing, and I'm like, I'm not breathing. And so I think you're right. I think that the anxiety gets traded for pain and joy. Like we just stop resisting all of it, right? Or maybe not stop, but there's less resistance to just being with what's flowing in the moment. But I don't know that that's possible without, especially if there's trauma, without helping the body move through that, like move through the trauma journey and sort of freeing the body, because it's happening in like the nervous system in the body, and it's just this guarding, this armoring, or fighting or freezing or whatever, but it's this nervous system thing that's happening. So I think you're exactly right, but it's far beyond intellectual. It's not like, I don't know if I can choose that, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, first of all, it's far beyond intellectual, and also, like importantly, then this is something that I didn't get. If you want to go down that path, you got to have a really, really massive support system, a really massive, like internal or a spiritual practice, or a teacher or teachers, and yoga and all that stuff. It's I had like this silly realization. No, not silly, but realization recently after studying it for years and years, and said, "Oh, this is what religion is about." Which is, of course, just one thing that religion is about. But creating a support system that lets you feel all that stuff. And like I said, when I eat, I feel, and when I go to the bathroom, and then you're constantly reminded throughout the day Yeah, it's very true, because I didn't understand it. And then I kind of was upset with myself because I said, yeah, it makes sense. Let's trade anxiousness for joy and pain. Cool. But you can't do that. You have to have so much support. We're so fragile.
Yeah.
We need a lot of stuff for it to happen, like on a daily level
Right.
support.
Mm-hmm. Because we're not like, there is without sort of like blaming everything on the overculture, and there was certainly like maliciousness and real darkness that led to the way that our culture and societies are set up, colonization and, might makes right, and I'm big and you're small and I'm going to take what I want, and all of those things. But also industrialization and like people just like, let's do this. And, this sort of organic thing that humans do, which is create and find edges. But the fracturing, like the splitting apart of both us internally, like we put spirit and God somewhere, we put our mental body over here, we put our emotional body down, we like stuffed that down into the underworld and said, don't come up, because we're not going to do that. And then there's like our body, like we fractured and separated ourselves. But we also did that to our villages, like to our communities, to our we've been like separating and disintegrating things, not integrating and making things more whole. And so what you're saying is right. Like we need so much support because our bodies, that's how they've been for, countless tens of thousands of years, is connected. Like we have all of these sensing systems that connect us to other humans, connect us to our environment, connect us to ourselves. And those systems still exist. Our new brain isn't doing that as much, but like these older parts of us, like the nervous system, these older parts of our brain are still looking for that connection, and it's just not there. And so
like children,
like I think yeah, exactly right. Like we're not meant to be alone. We're actually not meant to do this stuff alone. So I think that's absolutely right. Like these support systems, being around other humans, being around really safe humans, helping the body, like this is not unfortunately, I don't think it's a place where you like one day wake up integrated and whole. It's like this slow gathering back in of all of our parts and pieces, done in the vulnerability of community, whether it's humans or nature or whatever, but it's done in communion with other things. It's very vulnerable.
Yeah. And I want to add to the supporting things, the spiritual practice, which you sometimes do alone. To me, that's another support system that just kind of keeps me going and kind of helps me deepen things. And again, I think most of history, people lived within those systems. There's a lot of like historical research. It's really hard to know. There's a famous article saying, like the title is that, did the Greeks really believed in their gods? It's hard to tell, but I do think it's true that people lived within spiritual systems much more than today. And I think it's a really important point because I didn't understand it. I thought I could just kind of go through that transformation at some point. But no, you got to have like a whole... And it's funny to me because it's... I'm going to say it like, no, I don't want it to come out wrong, but kind of the more sensitive you become, the more support you need. And like in some terms of our like, sort of patriarchal society, you become weaker, quote unquote.
Right.
Because when I was number, I didn't need this stuff. I didn't need to pray. I didn't need to do the things that I do. And I felt fine at some point, at least seemingly. It feels fine. And like you said earlier about people who really fit into the culture, they feel fine. And it's and I've tried, trust me, I've tried to persuade some of these people that they don't feel fine. And it doesn't work because they do feel fine. Really, either
You're not
internally,
hearing that, huh? Yeah, right.
No. And not only are they fine, they would say, we feel better than you do. which is kind of
Yeah.
right. So
Right.
that's another part of it.
Yeah. When you do your spiritual practice, does it include, because I'm thinking of two things. One is that it's a way to connect with yourself. Like you're doing it alone, but you're connecting with, like it's a point to connect with yourself. Or do you feel, or something else that I haven't thought of, do you feel like you're connecting to God or other beings? Or does it feel very truly solitary?
I would love to hear what that's like for you in your spiritual practice. And I'll just say, no, God is also like where I am right now. I do Jewish stuff and I do yoga, and I do them pretty regularly, not quote unquote religiously, but pretty regularly. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very rare that a day would go by without me doing some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely. Like some of it is with me, some of it is with a group, and some of it is, and a lot of it is like also connecting with God. But like in my personal process, it has to. I first connect with myself, otherwise it feels
Mm-hmm.
empty. And a lot of the time, like it's most of the time, just like statistically, is spent about connecting with myself. And then at the end of that, I try to kind of communicate outwards, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reason I add, like, I think that part of this journey for me has been about connecting to myself, like
Mm-hmm.
connecting to an aspect of self that can hold and be with all of the things that are happening in myself. So in that way, it's like both solitary and I'm not the only one of me in there. There are a bunch of parts and pieces. So it's both solitary and it's connecting to more than one piece of me. That was a really big thing because it's like I'm not sure that I exactly had a container. I didn't have a home in my body to go to. And so it was always seeking outwards. It was always ruptured, I don't even know if they were ruptured boundaries. I was very boundaryless. And so connecting to myself has become a very, very important part of it. Like trusting myself, connecting to the safe container of myself, being able to hold the tender parts and pieces. So, and then the other part of my spiritual practice is definitely with my team, like with the unseen beings that interact with me. It's definitely connection with more of the unseen world. But yeah, it starts with, I have to have the connection to myself or I don't even have like an orienting place to start,
Yeah. I think with you, it's like the way that I experience what you say is there's a bunch, it's much more, it's very much connected to other, like even what you said this morning with the woman and the wolf dog. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the ETs and the angel, and there's like literally dozens and dozens of entities involved, right? Like with me, it's like me and maybe sometimes this thing that I call God in different aspects of it. And with you,
Mm-hmm.
it's so concrete, it's so real.
And only recently, right? Like it was always happening, but I always
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalized it and it felt like something happening to me rather than like a connecting. I think I'm just coming into sort of this, like in the last probably year, to this sort of ecosystem sense of connection. And that's pretty recent. But just acknowledging that whatever it is that's going on, that we're not alone, like the sort of illusion of separation, we're never disconnected. It's just like it's more that we can't see it or we are not in tune with those sensing systems. I don't know. I don't know if that's a truth, like a big capital T truth for everybody, but more and more I'm just like, wow, this place is full. Like, like I always look out my windows towards the forest because that forest in particular, it's like a dark forest and the ridge sort of comes within, I don't know, like 30 or 40 feet of my dome. And it's a north facing ridge. So it's like cold and dark and wet. And it is full. It's full. Yeah. I just think I'm getting this sense that we're just never alone. And then it becomes like, okay, what do I want to connect with? Like, that's the other thing. Like,
Mm,
not everybody just gets to come in. I don't
mm,
want, I really don't leave my door open on any level, like on any of my bodies or realms, or because there's a lot out there. There are hungry
mhm,
things. There are, you
mhm,
know, unconscious things there are things that are still just interested in serving self or, you know, manipulating or co-opting. Like, there's all that stuff exists. So not everything gets to come in, but like, I've made a lot of friends in this other world. Just me and all my invisible friends.
mhm. Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit more? What is it like to have so many different entities around you? Because, like you said, maybe everyone has that and we don't feel it, but you have that. Well, what is it like? I mean, it's a big question, obviously, but
Yeah, it's like comforting. It has become comforting
comforting.
because,
Mm.
yeah, because now the beings that do get through the door that I've like invited in and that I'm getting to know as real beings, like they're not my imagination, they're not a projection, just getting to know them and the trust that's been built, over a couple years and over a lot of boundary setting and all of that. Like, it's comforting if I wake up in the middle of the night and feel a little, can sort of feel something that feels off or kind of creeping around outside or that I don't feel comfortable with. I can say to them, what can you like keep an eye out? Because, like, so it feels comforting to have them and it feels magical and rich. And I'm like acclimating to being in a very crowded place. And I'm somebody who, like, I live alone in the middle of the woods and I go
Mhm.
to the nearest town maybe like every 2 weeks or something. Like, I don't want to be in a place with a lot of beings, but I'm like acclimating to the understanding that it's full, it's just everywhere. And it's like my nervous system is like, okay, what are boundaries? It's like the same rules, I think, for any relationship. It's like the boundaries have to be intact. What are my values? So I know who I get to associate with and who isn't allowed in. And it's a lot of really mundane stuff like that. That's just like all the same things that I'm way worse at in human relationships. I'm not very good at all those things, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and yet you're like a master of that. And it feels like a spectrum, right? I mean,
Mm.
there are there are extraterrestrials in crafts. There are, you talk about in the book. There are other kind of entities. There are kind of people who show up in the dream. There are people who show up in out of body experiences. Do they all feel like part of the same thing, or no? Some have like physical different characteristics, not in the way that they look, but I don't want to use the word real, but how real do they
Mm.
feel, or not real, but like if I'm thinking about the people in my dream, the people, the nice people, it's a thing, it's a tangible thing, and
Mm.
it feels like you have like dozens of varying different types of entities.
That is a very interesting, huge question. I think my worldview is that all of this is just one thing. So
Mm.
it is all, it's all just one big thing. So everything in it, like anything in form is all on some level the same thing. It's just like the different like prisms of creation and coming into form. So I think from that level, like from that very high view of like what is reality and what is the universe, what is God, what is source, and all of those things, like it is all just one thing. And they are all
So
also distinct beings. Mm-hmm.
like a ghost and a person in a dream. Is that not a different type of uh, being alive, or however we want to call it?
I do think that there's a difference. I wouldn't, I don't know enough to know if there's like a hierarchical reality of one being more real or more alive than another. But I think that like my
You,
small understanding of it is like there are thought forms that we create all the time. You know,
mm,
there are egregores that are created by big
mhm,
systems. Like
mhm,
there are these forms
mm,
that we create by our energy and attention. And they exist in the astral. Like the astral is just full of all this wild stuff. And so
mhm,
they're real, you know, but they're also thought forms that we created.
mhm,
They're
mhm,
And then there are beings like ETs from other planets. There are beings that are extra dimensional beings. They're like earth based invisible beings. There's the Fae.
mhm,
There's so just look at the variety of our one planet, which admittedly I think is a pretty special, amazing planet that's so just like bursting with life and chaos and diversity and all of these things. But just on our one planet, like the diversity of life. And I guess the other thing I would say is like the way that I've sort of compartmentalized and put framework around dreams is that there's the personal psyche dreams, which are when we go in and have a dream and all of the characters are actually us. Like it's our psyche expressing in all of these different characters. And so are they real? They're to me they're definitely real, but do they exist somewhere else outside of me? Like no, I think they're part of this my internal ecosystem. And
mhm,
then there are transpersonal dreams that communicate with other beings. And so the way that I look at it in sort of this like as above so below way is I feel like God or source or whatever is sort of doing the same thing that we're doing in this work, which is like gathering back in all of the fragmented parts and pieces that were sort of
mm.
split by creation and the 10,000 things, you know, came into existence. And so there's this like loving like integration happening. And just like that's happening with God sort of loving everything back home, that's what's happening in my psyche, you know, is like when I go into my dreams and I think and if I become lucid and if I remember, I try to love shadow aspects or something because I'm gathering in my own fractured parts and pieces. So I think that there's I don't know. That's my Oh, sometimes I feel like I'm just insane, like an insane person, but that's how
But
I
I gotta say,
have
this
framed
is
it all.
classic hardcore canon Kabbalah. The what you
Is
said about
it?
the source, get 100% gathering all the things.
Wow.
They kind of
Mm,
talk about it in a more tragic way that it was broken, the broken vessels.
mm,
There was light,
mm.
the vessels, too much light for the vessels, they broke. And now God and we need to do the same thing. Gather it. How did you say it? Gather it into the source, something like that.
Yeah, just sort of loving it all home, gathering it all
Loving it
back
all.
in.
Wow, that's way
Yeah.
better. Yeah, that's like classic Kabbalah, 100%. And
Mm,
also, I was listening to it and closing my eyes, and I just saw the universe just teeming with life, so
mm,
much life. And yeah, and you spoke about Earth, yeah, and all those microbes in the kind of wet dirt, all those
mm,
thousands and thousands all over, not thousands, billions, whatever.
mhm.
Yeah, and I'm looking at
Exactly.
my plants here. I'm looking at you guys. Yeah.
Wow. That's so, see, that's like, I think it's a good like point to sort of draw it to a close, but I want to say that
Mm-hmm.
is like why that's one reason. There are many reasons why I deeply, deeply value our relationship and
Mm.
cherish it and am so
Alhamdulillah.
grateful for it. But that's one of the reasons is because I can say something like that and it connects to Kabbalah and it's something that I had no idea. Like I don't, and it's so affirming. It's like, okay, I'm not, that feels like that connection feels so magical to me. That's like, that's like, it enlivens me. I'm just like, wow, that's
Mm.
amazing. How amazing that like, it makes me feel connected to humanity and to the people who thought of that and had that experience, and to where, and the Buddhists say something similar. Like, I think it was I'm not taking credit for the love, like God loving everybody home, because I think Ram Dass said something like that. Like, we're all just walking each other home, and so seeing those connections, it's like it's nourishing. It's just nourishing. I love it.
Thanks so much for saying that, Robin. Thanks so much. I just love you.
I love you too.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And it is all based on something. Those things are based on something. I don't know what, but they're based on something.
It's such a simple statement, and it's so profound. And because it means it came through humans, and it came through, like, of course it did. It's so obvious when you say it, but I had not brought that into the ecosystem as well. Like, I hadn't understood that. So yeah, I love it.
Wow.
Another amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robin. It really was amazing.
It's come to me in a massive moment, an overwhelming and all-encompassing fullness of knowing that includes both light and sound and now specific information, pulling together everything that I've spent the past 43 years living and learning. As I approach the sacred interior space, which includes dreams and out-of-body and contact with non-human and sometimes dead human beings, and altered states of consciousness, and that feeling of being so deeply in my own skin that I can only let so much of this human experience in, I heard a deep internal whisper. What is an embodied mystic, I wonder? I know it has to do with meeting my guides and developing those relationships, honing and understanding protection practices, not from a state of fear or cowering, but empowered and full of my own agency, listening to my dreams and cultivating a safe, wise, orienting aspect of self that can hold all of my still shuddering and scared parts and pieces and help them move on, evolve, grow up, and go on their own journeys. This all moves through deep gateways of grief, the grief of things lost, and the grief of the way it could have been, and the grief of injustice, and finally the grief of letting it all go. That leads to the relief of dying to it all, to be reborn in service to the other self, all beings everywhere, and suddenly the world is alive and glowing and full of animate enchantment. Unexpectedly, I have fallen away, slowly and carefully, but still full of trepidation from the stark, dead, reductionist machine of materialism-only thinking and being into an animate cosmology so full of life and connection and relationship and pleasure that I now deeply trust my own animal body. I've decentered normal waking consciousness as the only reality and have found a magical world behind the world, and it blows my mind, in a good way, every day. Emerging from those sacred interior depths are my dark and golden shadows, both loved into wholeness, lucid dreams where I fly and commune with beings and see that my dreams are like my life, and my life is like a dream. All of a sudden I see my North Star, my soul work, my vocation, my calling, my heart, and she's perched on the horizon, drawing me both up and out and down and in, a wholeness that emanates from without and within, the somatics of embodied mysticism. A whole body glow as I walk down the road in a little valley I call home, joints swinging and free in my grounded and flying alive animal body. This will be the stuff that fills up the days of the rest of my life. Glory be. To connect with Yoni, or to connect with Morgan Jenks, the creator of the music for this episode of the podcast, check the show notes. or to book a one-on-one session with me, visit honeyheart.org.